Welcome back, Wanderer, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today, I'm joined by Jim Zub, a prolific writer, artist, and art instructor from Toronto, Canada. With an impressive portfolio spanning Marvel, DC Comics, Disney, Capcom, and more, Jim is also a dedicated professor at Seneca Polytechnic, where he imparts his wisdom on drawing and storytelling. His current projects include Conan the Barbarian and Dungeons & Dragons comic series, immersing readers in epic adventures. Jim, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me back. This is the third time, so in hockey parlance, I guess this is our hat trick. Is that how we're doing this?
It is, eh? You're showing you're Canadian there.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, did I say eh? What's that all about? Okay, so...
No.
We don't actually say that out here.
That's what they all say, and then as soon as the interview's off, we just break into this Eastern Canadian French mash broke like you would not believe. It's great.
Go grab some poutine. All right.
That's right.
So we're here to talk about Gen Con, buddy, and I appreciate you taking time because you're heading to San Diego right away and then back-to-back with Gen Con. That's
why crazy people decided to push these shows back-to-back. I've done it once before where they were back-to-back, and the small random particles that were left of me after the second one, I'm really looking forward to it. 2024, bring it on. It's a wild one. It's this 5-day show and then this 5-day show like back to back. It's just the biggest that pop culture has to offer, and then the biggest that gaming has to offer in two very different places with two massive vibrant crowds. It is fantastic. I never ever want to take for granted the fact that you even get to attend these things. So it's always that weird thing where you always see professionals, go, oh, woe is me, I must go forth again into the fray, kind of stuff. And it's like, dude, most people don't get to go to any of these things, like ever. So there's always a balance to be struck where you can say, like, I'm stressed, it's a lot of work, productivity goes to zero. There's a reason why every comic book in October ships late, because July and August are going to wreck you, But that being said, I do love it. Obviously, I wouldn't keep doing it if I didn't love it. And I didn't love seeing people and your convention family and your friends and, people who have enjoyed your work. And it's a very amazing thing to even have access to if I have a moment to think about it. Yeah.
Well, that sets the stage really nicely for us. And I see you've been working on your voice acting. That was fantastic. But before we dig right into the topic, people who've been here know who you are. We all kind of know who you are. Oh, but I've had a lot of people join the community from other industries in the last few months. So can you catch us up, short version, before we jump into Gen Con? How'd you get in? Highlights.
Sure. My name is Jim Zub. I'm probably best known for comic book writing, but I've done a bunch of stuff in the gaming sphere as well. In gaming terms, I'm probably best known for being the writer of the official Dungeons & Dragons comic series for 10 years. I also wrote on things like Rick and Morty versus Dungeons & Dragons, Stranger Things, and Dungeons & Dragons. I was the architect and lead writer on the ongoing Dungeons & Dragons Young Adventurers guides. And I love sword and sorcery and fantasy, and currently am the flagship writer on Conan the Barbarian. And, when you say that, you can't help but smile because that's ridiculous. And this kid from Oshawa should not have done any of those things. So how did we sort of get here? So yeah, I grew up in Oshawa, Ontario, just east of Toronto. Huge nerd, gaming, comics, animation, all that kind of stuff. Started working in animation, eventually made myself a webcomic. I hitched my wagon to the Udon studio as they were sort of growing and moving into doing artwork for comics and games. And that gave me a crash course in how the industry works, both in terms of publishing and freelance artwork and development, how to network at conventions, how publishing functions, contracts, all that kind of stuff. And then eventually I spun that off into doing my own creator-owned comic work. Probably the one that hit for most people. I did a webcomic for a little while, and that gained a small fan base at a time when the nascent internet was sort of figuring itself out. But my breakout, if you want to call it that, was probably Skullkickers, which is this sword and sorcery action comedy series I did that started in 2010. And that put me on the map for people as, hey, this guy writes some pretty good stuff. From there, I did the Pathfinder comic series for Paizo. and a bunch of other stuff from there, and have worked for almost every comic publisher in North America. So you name it, Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, quite a few creator-owned books at Image. Obviously, Udon, as I mentioned before, Dynamite, and I'm currently, the Conan series is being published by Titan, and I work directly with the rights holders at Heroic Signatures. Other than that, nothing. Pretty boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slacker.
Yeah, that's right.
You were also, just to put a point on this, you were also an instructor at Seneca Polytechnic?
Yeah, that's right. So I teach courses in drawing, perspective drawing, environmental design, and storytelling for Seneca Polytechnic's 3-year animation program. I was the actual coordinator, like the head of curriculum development and, portfolio reviews and finding instructors and building the program and doing the budgets and all that stuff for quite a few years. And so I juggled that alongside my writing career, which is really bad for maintaining a work-life balance, but it was very potent in terms of building my career. And at this moment, I'm on my much needed teaching sabbatical that I've had in the works for quite a few years, but was sort of on my sabbatical was on hiatus. That sounds really bizarre to say that. I had a sabbatical, it was approved, and then the year of our Lord 2020 happened, and then nothing happened. And so we put a pin in that and said, we'll get back to it. And 2024 was the year where I finally pulled the lever. And now I'm on a teaching break and just one career, the writing career, which is why maybe I feel like I'm ready for Gen Con, because I don't have the teaching stuff also bubbling in the background at the same time.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say congratulations. You pick which one of those many accolades you want to apply it to. But
thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, let's dig into Gen Con. So this massive convention, primarily gaming, but it does lots of other stuff. There's our writer symposium and such.
Yeah.
Can you share some of the most memorable moments you've had or milestones from attending?
So I've been going to Gen Con regularly since 2011. Like, I've had a booth there that I share with 2 other authors, Howard Taylor and Tracy Hickman, since 2011. I attended my first Gen Con in 2004, but I went really kind of scattered, like a few years in a row and then a big gap. And then 2011 was sort of like locked back in, like, oh, this is just part of the tour now. And have so many friends, that I've made thanks to those conventions. It's not the first gaming convention I ever went to. That would be, I think, Origins. 2003 would have been the first year that I did Gen Con, because I did Origins that year in Columbus, Ohio, and made friends with a bunch of different people. And that's kind of the big thing about it, is any convention, if you've never been to one before, I mean, obviously you have, but I'm saying to your listeners, it's about kind of putting names to faces and being able to celebrate this stuff with people where you don't have to explain anything. You don't have to explain any of the lexicon or what your favorite games are or which companies are doing what. The people here know this stuff deeper and darker than you do in almost every case anyways, and they are so passionate about it. And just seeing that interactivity. And I love gaming conventions, maybe more than comic conventions. Just because of their interactive quality, that we are here to do a thing together, to share in that experience and have new experiences, playing games and playing adventures, and particularly with RPGs where you're like, we're playing characters and we're getting into this thing. And whether it's being dropped into a scenario with a group of strangers, and this is going to be the way we're going to spend some time and break the ice, or with some of the people you love best, and you're just like, all right, let's see what you've been up to, or let's see what you got this time to pull out of the hat. I love that interactive quality of gaming shows. I love that by its very nature, it's a sharing kind of environment. Not to say that comics can't be, you are sharing in the fandom and the excitement, but it's very much kind of a one-way sort of I'm meeting an author and I'm getting, an autograph, or I'm having a conversation with them. And that's cool too. But the fact is, after hours at a comic show, sidebar, it's probably also because comic shows are my primary kind of, work. Yeah. So all the networking events, I definitely feel that heightened sense of, I could turn this into more projects. And I think the gaming shows, it's not like I don't have gaming projects, but I'm like I get to be a weird interloper where I get to go to all the industry stuff and the parties and hang out with people, but I'm not expected to be central to their attention, or I don't have to be up on all the latest gossip or whatever may have you, right? It's just like, oh, and Jim's here too. You're like, that's great. You know, and if you want to work with me, you know how to find me, and that's great. But there's a different level of expectation, I think, there. And so that probably feeds into my biases as far as that goes.
That makes sense. But to me, like, I was just talking to Richard Dansky. I interviewed him for Gen Con as well. That episode will be before this one. And he goes to GDC and does the narrative design side of his world, and then he goes to Gen Con. And he was saying the same thing as GDC and other cons. You're always trying to kind of like, there's the networking, because I hate that freaking word. Whereas Gen Cons hang out.
Yeah, networking is this weird thing. People ask, well, how do you do networking? And the reality is, don't be a dick. Be easygoing. Be the kind of person that you would want to spend time with and potentially work with. And, you know, at the higher end of things, hitch your wagon into in terms of business and pleasure, in terms of the, you know, making stuff together and creative collaboration. And that sounds way easier than it is, of course, you know, especially if it's like your first show and you're trying to turn this into a job, let alone an ongoing career. I know there's that sense of, well, this is my shot. And if I mess it up, or if I don't make the right impression, or if I don't meet the right people, it'll all fall apart. And all this will have been for naught, and all that dramatic stuff. And it's very easy for me to say now, 20 plus years on, don't worry about it. But that's a lie, because of course I was worried about it. And of course I was freaking out. And I still have those moments, like the long shows in particular. I'm more zen about it now, but I used to go through these, San Diego Comic-Con and Gen Con in particular. They're so long and they're so involved that inevitably you're going to have that roller coaster and you're going to bottom out at some point. You're just going to be exhausted, or something's not going to go the way you hope, or another meeting gets canceled or delayed, or people aren't communicating, or things fall apart, or there's some weird little emergency that happens. And you're like, why do I do this? Do you know what I mean? Like, what have I done to throw myself into this threshing machine? But on the other hand, inevitably, there will always be something that happens, some little bit of kismet, some fun interaction, some introduction, some conversation that makes it all worthwhile. And usually far more of those than any of the latter, right? Or the former, in terms of bad stuff. So it's a bit of a journey. You have to pace yourself for it. And the networking is part of that pacing. You know, some people feed on the social energy, you know, they're extroverted and they can just sort of throw themselves into it. And when they finish, the battery is full, and other people, it just drains and drains and drains. And my wife and I are pretty opposing in terms of that. She'll finish a day at Gen Con and be like, I want to go out for dinner with one or two people, and then I want to crawl back to the hotel and get a book, or just faceplant and sleep. And I'm sort of like, wow, that was great. Let's keep going. Let's go. More people. Well, let's go see those people. Hey, did you know someone's doing something on the other side? Let's go run around the convention center and do a thing. And Gen Con's one of those shows where there are literally events running 24 hours a day. When the exhibit hall is closed, this show just keeps going and going. A good friend of mine, he was working for a company that was looking at getting involved in gaming. They were a publisher that was looking at other avenues, and they sent him, I don't know how he conned them into sending him for a free, exploratory trip the year before they were going to potentially get a booth themselves. But they did. And so he showed up on the Thursday afternoon, right as the exhibit hall was closing. By the time he got from the flight and got to his hotel and checked in, whatever. So he comes by the convention center just as the exhibit hall is closing. And he's like, you want to grab dinner? I was like, sure. So we grab some dinner and a drink. And he's like, man, I can't wait to start playing games tomorrow. And I was like, oh, what are you talking about? And he goes, yeah, I mean, playing games, like, let's go play right now. And he goes, well, but the hall's closed. I'm like, this isn't a comic show. This isn't about panels, and it's not about the vendors. That is a part of the show, but there are literally games running around the clock. And we walked into the convention center, and it is vibrant at like 10 o'clock at night. There is people running around, and there's pickup games happening, and there's tournaments going on. And he is just in absolute awe. He cannot believe that this convention is so electric this late at night, because it's not like any other show you've been to if you haven't been to one of these kinds of things. And I end up walking him past one of the demo halls, and we're watching people playing miniatures games and board games, and he gets really fascinated. So we do a game demo together. And then there's an announcement that comes over the PA that there's a closed pack, like Magic tournament where you're going to build your deck literally within an hour and then start playing and see who's going to win. And he's like, holy crap, I used to do that in high school. That was the best ever. I said, well, you can go play. And he's like, yeah. He said, I don't want to abandon you. I'm like, dude, I'm going to bed. And then tomorrow morning, I got to be at my booth. Like, you go have fun. And I didn't see him until mid-afternoon the next day. And he was just zipping for the rest of the show. He was so excited. And he bought so much stuff. He had to ship things home. Like, it was awesome. It was such a pure experience, to see someone else seeing it with those wide, innocent eyes and the excitement that comes from it. And you start, no matter how cool it is, you start to take for granted that you're going to do this every August. And, oh, cool, that's where that vendor is. And, oh, this booth has changed slightly, or this company's gone and this company's back, or this company's new. But on the whole, you kind of get the lay of the land and you know where things are at. And it was really fun just having someone kind of losing their minds all over again. And you're like, oh yeah, oh, you sweet summer child. That's great. No, like, I love it. Yeah.
You need to bring a new person every time just to have that fresh perspective.
It's super valuable. I always ask people, how many Gen Cons you've been to? And you could tell when someone's got the con virgin. They're just like, what is happening? In the best kind of way possible. It's super fun. Yeah,
very absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk a little more about this con that's coming up. Mm-hmm. I know for sure you're on the D&D panel, the 50 Years of D&D Comics panel. What else are you on? And tell us, what can people expect at that one? What do you think is going to happen there?
So there's a group of us. Yeah, it's the 50th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons, and it's been such a wild ride, I've been associated with D&D off and on. Like, I did some artwork back in the day for Dragon Magazine with Paizo, which is how I met those guys, Dungeon and Dragon. I did some artwork in the 4th edition Monster Manual. But really, most of my kind of D&D stuff has been in 5th edition. I was lucky enough that I got to start doing the comic series as 5th edition was launching. So the last 10 years have been just this wild rocket ride. And that went from no one cares about D&D to, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. And all of a sudden you realize all your friends who suddenly think it's cool and amazing. And you're just like, where have you been for the last 25 years or whatever? But yeah, there's going to be a really cool group of us lined up talking about the D&D comics, because they have been running for a long, long time. I used to read them when they were being published at DC. They had an Advanced Dungeons and Dragons miniseries. They did Spelljammer. They did Forgotten Realms. They did all sorts of different stuff. So we're going to have old school and new school. We're going to be talking about the comics and the fiction just as a whole, which is going to be a ton of fun. Matt Forbeck, reached out to me. He's this amazing developer and writer. He's been in the industry for decades. And he was just like helping put together the 50th anniversary content. Is this something you're interested in? I said, of course, it's just amazing. I'm actually doing a D&D 50th anniversary panel at San Diego as well, which is really fun. Yeah, Matt's on that one as well. And Luke Gygax is going to be on that panel. And I met him for the first time this year. He had been in touch with me a few years ago about coming to GaryCon. And it just hadn't worked. And then this year I'd carved out the time, because obviously it's the 50th anniversary and it was the biggest one they've ever done. And I finally got to meet a bunch of these, creators who I've always wanted to, for the very first time, which was cool. I got to chat with Errol Otis, which was amazing. He was such a great guy. I got to do just all kinds of different people, Chris Arneson and all these different people that I've known sort of peripherally in the industry or have heard about over the years. Yeah. Finally getting to chat with them and hang out and play a lot of 1st edition D&D. And that's kind of also been really fun too. I'm really hoping that I get a chance to just sit down and play more, because one of the things that can be difficult with Gen Con when you make it a job and when you're at a booth is you don't always have time for games. You end up going that whole week and you realize you haven't played anything, which is bizarre, but that's the nature of it being your job instead of just making it a vacation or something, you know?
Right. So besides the panel with Ed Greenwood, Jim Lauder, and Matt Forbeck, are you doing any other, and your booth, are you doing any other work kind of things, or are you just going to?
Yeah, there's some stuff getting sort of figured out. I'm going to be doing there's a couple parties of stuff I'm going to go to, social things. There's a lot of designers will run sort of private playtest sessions of things they're working on. Cool. So Monolith, for example, has a new Conan role-playing game. I don't know if you saw the quick start that came out a couple of weeks ago. It's called Conan the Barbarian. It's the same company that did the board game, the hit board game. They're now doing a tabletop RPG, and the developer on it, they've been in touch, and the lead developer on it's a friend of mine. And so I have already play tested a couple times and given them feedback, but he's going to be running some sort of private play sessions before it goes even deeper. And now the quick start's out as well. So I know other people are going to be playing that. So I think that there's a bunch of those kinds of things. And then there's always inevitably, I try and leave time open, because I'll run into friends of mine who work in game design, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm play testing a secret game. Do you want in?" And you're like, "Yes, always." So like, get a couple beers and let's go to potentially someone's hotel suite or a little side table or somewhere tucked away. I mean, if you haven't been to Gen Con, even just the convention center is nuts. You can find little tables here and there and everywhere. But then every hotel, every lobby, every, party room in every restaurant, there's some sort of games running for that week. It's a little crazy. I remember, Indianapolis was not used to Gen Con when I first went, because I don't know if 2003 was the first year they were in Indy. Maybe it was 2002. I know they hadn't been there long, because we would go to restaurants and they would constantly, the staff would be asking, "What is this thing?" And they don't do that anymore. Now, decades on, they're very well integrated in terms of like, oh, the nerds are coming and they're money and let's go all in on drink specials and crazy stuff and, all that. But that first year, I remember there was a waitress we were talking to, and she comes over and we said, she said, "Are you all here for the convention?" And we said, "Yeah, Gen Con." And she goes, "Gen Con, like jewelry?" And we were like, "No." And she just goes, "Oh, well, you all have a nice night." Like, she just couldn't fathom what we were talking about when we, said games or whatever. She was just like, "What?" It's like every so often you'll go to a little city that doesn't do Comic-Con stuff. You'll do a comic convention there, and you'll say you're there for comics, and they're like, "Oh, you're comedians," and you're just like, "Oh God," like.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us. Yes, we're all stand-up comedians. That's correct.
Do you have a joke in your back pocket just for that case?
No. I just sort of let it ride. I should, though. Now that I'll just do a tight 10 up. Just give me a mic and just bust it out. That said, I probably could at this point, because there's a panel that I do only in Seattle for some reason, Emerald City Comic Con. There's a panel that Katie Cook and I do every year called Convention Horror Stories. And I have some of these down to just like the smoothest, I can tell you a weird story about meeting someone or some creepy interaction with a fan and, and all that kind of stuff. And they are gut-wrenching and embarrassing, usually for me, but sometimes for other people. And they were the kinds of conversations you'd have after hours, over 3 pints or whatnot. And now you're just like, oh, we're just going to say these in daylight in front of a crowd of people. And they love it. They love it. It is an absolute smash of a panel. We've been doing it now. I want to say this was the 14th year that we did it, maybe the 13th year. And we pack the room. If they put us in a standard panel room, it's instantly full, lineup at the door. They put us in a double panel room, we fill it. They put us in a triple panel room and we fill it. So it's so in that way, I could probably do a comedy set if I really had to. I would just have to do a little preamble about, going to Comic-Con and then just like hit it.
Just set it up and
Yeah. Last year, Katie wasn't there. And we don't take questions. It's not a panel. There's no interaction with the audience. It's Katie and I trying to make each other laugh, basically. And, they say, like, if you did an open mic night, they're like, you got to do a tight 5 or a tight 10 or whatever. Katie and I do a tight 60. We just do a comedy special. We can just fill it, no problems.
That's cool. I wish it was like recorded and shared out into the world.
Yeah, I think it's been recorded once or twice. I know there's an audio version. Someone like stealth recorded it, and we specifically say, please don't record this. And of course, that's in there as well. But it's fine. It hasn't destroyed my career. So clearly,
obviously.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of careers, speaking of comics, Gen Con is that perfect mash of comics and literature and pop culture, and then gaming and entertainment.
Yeah.
And as somebody who works so heavily in both, can you touch on how the convention influences the careers and the industries?
Well, this is the thing, and the industry is so much more international than it's ever been. And you can certainly have a career working digitally and working remotely, but it certainly can smooth those waters a lot faster if you're able to meet people. And like I said before, sort of put faces to names and have good conversations and the natural kind of kismet that comes from just hanging out with people. And then all of a sudden someone goes, oh my God, I have to introduce you to so-and-so, or, you remind me so much, or this cool project I just heard about. Why don't we all grab breakfast tomorrow, or things like that. Those kinds of little engagements that you just wouldn't find normally, that they just wouldn't pop up in the same respect.
Yeah.
So that is super, super valuable. I mean, in some ways you could also deep six yourself if you're a real jerk in those same corridors, but most of the people that have been around for a long time, they've been around because they're good people and they're the kind of people you want to hang with and you want to game with and you want to build cool, creative things with. And so, like last year, I'll give you an example. Jeff Richards, he's, running stuff over at Chaosium with the Call of Cthulhu stuff and all their other games. And he, Glorantha and all the games that they do, Pendragon and all that stuff. And he just reached out to me, got my email from a mutual friend and just said, we have so many mutual friends, but I don't know you. And that seems wrong. So I need to take you for a coffee. I was like, well, I appreciate the forwardness of that. That's kind of cooler than tiptoeing around it.
Yeah.
Great, man. Let's do it. And so we went out for like maybe 45 minutes, grabbed a coffee, went for a walk, near the convention center. By the time we came walking back, it rained a bit and we tucked underneath an awning and we kept chatting. And then we ended up back at the convention center. And normally those kinds of meetings are, I have a specific project I'm going to pitch you that I think you'd be a good fit for. So I was just waiting for that shoe to drop. And there was none. He was just literally like, yeah, you sound cool. It was great. And so when we met up again at GaryCon, we ended up like thick as thieves. We were just laughing and chatting and gossiping and now he's a friend. You know what I mean? And it's like, whether or not I ever do a creative project with that guy, what a cool dude. What a great, little bit of conversation. And he made the effort to just reach out and let's have a chat. And it was like, well, that's cool. Especially if you go with no expectations and no fear of just like rejection or whatever. You're just like, cool, I want to meet people. I want to be more plugged into this industry. Gaming is such a do-it-yourself kind of industry. A lot of people start up companies, in their garage, in their basement, in their bedrooms, whatever you want to call it, just making stuff, doing things for a long enough period of time. Comics very much in that same kind of mindset. And so, go to conventions with the desire to build out your friend pool, you know what I mean? And understand that that's kind of the most important thing you can do. And as hard as it is, and as desperate as it can feel sometimes that you want to instantly turn this over into a career, that's not top priority. That stuff comes with experience and with putting work out there and with, being humble and decent and sticking with it. Yeah.
Amen. Not to make it about me, this is the Jim Zub show, but
no. Talk about your experiences.
I can underline what you're saying with the fact that this podcast would not exist if I had not gone to that Gen Con,
right?
Sat down at the World Builders Party, played a board game with you and Matt, and Jonathan was there and Brendan was there.
Yeah.
That always started opening doors. So when I finally had the idea, hey, let's do this podcast, it was, I'm going to get Jim because I know Jim now. I'm going to call Matt, and Matt introduced me to people, and that was it. It just opened the doors.
That's how it goes. I mean, Matt Forback knows everybody,
Yes,
it's like
he does.
Him and Ross Thompson, and there's a couple other people who are like so plugged in. They are central, they're King's Cross Station in terms of the subway lines of industry. And it's like, just be cool, be decent, be welcoming, be open, and remember that we're all here playing games and making stuff. You know what I mean? And you can't take it all in and you can't do it all. So, like anything else, just be the kind of person that you want to spend time with, and you're going to gather people who are like-minded and also decent. And makes a huge difference. But, I get a lot of people, they're starting a podcast, they're doing a thing, they're putting together a website. And that's cool, and I want to help, but you can't do them all, right? But then, like you said, you were at the convention, we played some games together. Well, I know that guy. Well, that's a decent guy. Oh, we had good conversation at the table, just sitting right there. This will be easy. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of thing that you need to sort of understand. And go there. Remember why you love this stuff in the first place. Because again, trying to make it a career is so much more stressful because it's something you're passionate about. Not that any job, is not stressful, but it's like, it's not the kind of career that you do your 9 to 5 and you turn your brain off and you go home and live for the weekends or something. Any kind of creative pursuit, any kind of in media, in publishing, in games. We all have been so inspired because of the games we've played and the things we've done. And you feel that extra passion and pressure. And that can be, that's a sort of tainted chalice at times where you're throwing yourself into it so much because you love it so much. And you can have that feeling of like, why doesn't it love me back? Especially at the start, when you're just trying to make those inroads. I've been very, very, very fortunate and very thankful, at the friendships I've made and the people who have, hung the light out for me in terms of my career. And I try and pay it forward as much as I can, but everyone's got their own kind of path that they're going to be taking, and no one's going to care. I'm just going to mix my metaphors just madly here.
Go for it.
Like a quality writer would. I can't carry you past the goalposts and then tell you scored. You know what I mean? You've got to put in the sweat equity and build away, and there's no inevitability to it. Not to get negative, but one of the difficulties of talking about breaking in or talking about networking or talking about the work is that you are talking to someone who has been able to do this for 20 years, and it's survivor bias. Do you know what I mean? It's like asking I don't think it's 1-to-1, but asking lottery winners how to pick numbers. You're just like, well, I've always felt it's really important to think about, all the birth dates of my cousins, or like whatever. There's a certain amount of kismet and randomness involved in it. And yes, obviously I've worked very hard and I've been methodical about it. And when an opportunity has come up, I've tried to grab it with both hands and make the most of it. But there are tons of very skilled, very hardworking people who could have done it as well. You know what I mean? And they're not in the industry still. So as much as I say, do it and keep doing it and don't stop and all those kinds of things, there's an inherent bias built into that right from the get-go. You know what I mean? And you could interview, but no one's seeking out an interview for, hey, you tried to start your career 5 times and it never came together. Why don't you tell us about that? You know what I mean? Those people aren't getting requests. So it's that weird sort of thing, right? Like I've got a shelf of books, that I've published behind me here, and that's cool. But by its very nature, I'm telling you that things are good.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah.
I've made a point of interviewing a couple people, a few people, a handful of people even, who are either outside of the industry they're trying to get into, or I've exited it, because I do want those point of views as well. So I think it's important that we understood this.
Valuable. And it's not to say that, again, this has to be all the chips you have to put in. There's a reason why I was teaching for so long, right? Mm-hmm. It was because financially I had to use that as, I love teaching and I love engaging with those students, but it was also a real safe harbor as the rising, changing, shifting tides of publishing and media, that I was trying to navigate. So everyone's got their own thing. I will say this as a piece of advice, do not think that having a day job or having that other career is somehow some sign of failure. Some of your favorite authors are not as rich as you think they are, you know what I mean? And don't have And that's not to say that everyone is hand to mouth. Like, I'm doing very well now and I'm very thankful, but it was far from inevitable. And it was, and it's not inevitable that it will always be this way. So you're just sort of like, okay, celebrate those victories and, keep plugging away as best you can.
Amen. Good advice, buddy.
Thanks.
Speaking of advice, let's pull it back to Gen Con for a second. So,
sure.
As we kind of talked about, show up, be yourself, don't go in with just go make friends. But do you have other advice
book some things? Yeah, book some events. Like some people I find the two extremes where they're like, I'm not going to plan anything. I'm just going to let the convention wash over me. And you're like, no, you should plan some things. Like, think of it like you don't want to overcommit. So, there's one or two panels you want to check out every day for sure. These are like tent posts that you can then build the rest of your day around. Or, man, there's that new hot game. You really want to demo it or you really want to try it. Put that on the schedule and then build around it. But try not to, all right, I've got 15 minutes to cram food into the food hole, and then I have to run to the other side of Hell's Half Acre to be to this thing. And as soon as that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to dodge traffic, and then we're going to be over on this side of the gate. Like, no. There's a balance to be struck there. Put a few things on the schedule, and then leaves like, oh, I'm going to wander the exhibit hall. Great. I'm going to, go to the open play area. Great. Like, that's the kind of thing you want to be able to give yourself a block out. Same thing with meals. Like, half your meals, maybe, book it with people you want to spend time with if you're going there with friends, or have little, we're all going to meet here, on whatever Saturday night, but otherwise we're sort of free form in the afternoon or things like that. And that way you've got enough structure that you're not diffused and confused and frustrated, that you're like either moving towards the thing that you are excited about, or you've just finished that thing and now you got some downtime to sort of let it wash over you or whatever, but you're not, so overcommitted that you feel like you're going to need a vacation from your vacation. Like, this is still meant to be fun. And bring really good walking shoes, bring enough water, try not to eat meals at the convention center if you can at all help it. Try and get that moment to step away. You know what I mean? Those kinds of elements are going to be really good. If you're purchasing something big and heavy and expensive, like, give yourself a way to store that thing or get that back to your hotel. Do that late in the day or do that right before you're going to be dropping stuff off. Because as cool as those $80 hardcovers seem like they're going to be, like, once you are Sherpaing those about, it's going to hurt real bad.
That's what I was. Look at all the advice. This is like a 7-layer cake of Jim Zub Gen Con advice.
Yeah, I have been on all sides of that thing where, I'm trying to get my product in the convention center. I'm trying to schlep stuff and set it up. You're trying to spare your energy, all those things. It's kind of wild. I don't know. And, here's the thing. Any of the fast food options that are within walking distance of the convention center are going to be constantly under siege. One of the things that's a little bit of a secret is if you've got a bit more of a budget, some of the higher end restaurants, you can still get tables. You can drop in and do a meal there if you want to spend a little bit more, because most of the people there are just scarfing down food and running to the next, event. Yeah. So if you want a real, high class meal with someone, you might be surprised. You might be able to get a steak or something like that and just kind of step back and go live it up a bit if that's something that interests you.
Very cool. All right, buddy. I think we're going to start bringing Gen Con to a close, and then we'll do some fun questions quick. But last Gen
only that were the case.
Yeah, right. No,
it's in the oncoming windshield. Yeah.
Do you have any rituals or is there anything about Gen Con that you do that's kind of weird or different, or favorite activities or?
There's a couple restaurants and bars I'll hit up. There's a couple of regular events. So Heroic Signatures, they're the rights holders of all the Robert E. Howard stuff, most notably Conan the Barbarian. Mm-hmm. And Fred and Jay always have a cocktail party, and they literally, ostensibly, it's a networking event where they want everyone who's even tangentially associated with the character over the years in all sorts of different ways to just hang out and chat, because that's how cool stuff happens.
Yeah.
And I love that. hangout party because it's real low stress. No one's trying to get something from you. They're all just hanging out. And you're encouraged to just like bring somebody who might be a good fit. And you're like, oh, this is great. This is super fun. I love that event. The Diana Jones party. Do you know about Diana Jones? You must.
Do, yeah. Yeah. I just talked to Matt the other day.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So the Diana Jones meetup always feels like that's the opening salvo. That's the first big social push for the show. And it's got a real warm, here we go kind of energy to it, which is great. And that bar gets so packed, you could body surf to the bathroom, right. Which is, it's stupid, but it's its own kind of joy of here we go again, So I do quite enjoy that in a lot of ways. Yeah, I love trying to think of, there's a handful of people who will come to the table who are lifers. Like every single year they're going to come by. They don't buy any of my books in stores. They wait all year and they just come and they literally like, I'll take one of everything that you've released since last year. We have this long, nice, involved conversation. And if they weren't there, it would feel very strange. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's one gentleman, he always comes by and he gets me to do a sketch cover for him or a drawing commission. And he always gets me to draw him being killed by something I'm involved with. So, when I'm doing Skullkickers, it's one of the Skullkickers cast, or it's Wayward, or it's Glitterbomb, or it's, Pathfinder, or it's whatever. So the last year, the Conan, Atlantean sword, killing him, great. He's in his glory, having a blast. Rick and Morty or whoever else, you know what I mean?
Nice.
And so if he doesn't come by, I'll be choked because that guy's also going to come by every year and get a little commission. These are the fun things. Anything that you do, once that's enjoyable, make it a regular thing. 3 times, it's a ritual. There you go. All of a sudden, 5 years, it's a tradition, and then no one can stop you anymore,
Very cool. Now I want a drawing of Boo chewing on my head.
Right?
Yeah.
This is what's so fun about it. That's the thing, is that I forget who said it to me. There was some sort of a dinner or meetup I went to, and it was this, every year we do this thing and you get to be a part of it and you're like, oh, that's so cool. And I said, well, how did this start? And they go, well, 5 of us went for dinner. And you're just like, oh. And then the next year we did it again at the same restaurant. And then all of a sudden it was, okay, who's booking it? That's the thing. You can make your own rituals at any convention that you want anytime and give it a semi-stupid or formal title. And you'd be shocked how much momentum you can get if you do it 3 times in a row. Yeah.
Let's be honest, that's how Gen Con started.
That's how all these conventions started, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Very cool. So you've been on here for twice before. You've answered my core philosophical question at the heart of the podcast, blah, blah, blah. But I want to throw it again. See if you changed or come up with something new anyways. So that question is, in my opinion, there's a magical space that exists at the intersection of story and game, obviously, comic books, improv acting, voice acting, video games, all of this, where we can all just hang out, get along, shared language, fellowship. If you agree with my theory, and not everybody does, but if you do, what is the magical thread that holds that space together?
Now, I don't remember my previous answer, so this might end up being like a creepy thing where it just perfectly overlaps again.
That'd be cool.
But if you say it to me right in the here and now, I just think that we as people, stories define us, right? Like, if I want my students to remember something, really bone deep remember it, I will tell it to them in a story. I will relate it to them in a narrative of my own life, my own experiences, the things that I've seen, or sometimes I'm retelling someone else's story and kind of rebuilding it in a way that frames that knowledge and helps them. And so when we build these stories together, whether they're just, whatever, a miniatures kind of skirmish game, and the natural randomness of the dice creates a weird, funky narrative of failure or victory, it sticks with us, those kinds of experiences, those fun engagements. Yeah. And it's the thing that makes us feel human, is shared time, shared space, shared creativity. I think it's very, very, very valuable. And I wish more people had a chance to experience that through gaming, because not to, of course, everyone's got bad game experiences and frustrating things, but the good is so good that it just always paves over any of that annoying negativity for me,
Good answer.
Thanks.
When you spend so much time in the world of storytelling, whether you're talking to storytellers all the time, or you're crafting stories, playing stories, you sometimes forget that there's other paradigms, that there's like people who live in the world of architect and bricklaying and road building, and that's the world. They understand everything through the analogies and metaphors that are their world.
Sure.
And it's kind of hard to remember that sometimes. Like,
my mother and I, she always asks me, she goes, I don't know where these stories come from. She's a voracious reader. She just ingests crazy amounts of books. She watches lots of TV. She loves stories. Mm-hmm. She loves narrative, but she's never felt a desire or a skill to craft them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've tried to sort of tease it out of her, and it's just not something that feels natural or approachable to her. I don't know if it's the embarrassment of failure or she's not synergizing. Okay, but you think about this thing and then you combine it with this other thing and then you say, well, what happens next? Do you know what I mean? She just doesn't put it together in that way. And in some ways, it's like, it fascinates the hell out of me. It fascinates I want to run experiments. Like, what do you mean you don't? Like, how could you not? Like, I can't stop doing it. You know what I mean? So in that same way where you take it for granted in some ways, and you're hanging out with highly creative people who are always doing stuff. And it's like, of course, that's how everyone frames their conversations or has those witty little isms. And then you do that in a few other places, or I go to whatever family barbecue and no one wants to talk to me about games or sword and sorcery and all those things. And it's like a very good, humbling, grounding, right, back in the real world. People are really concerned about this potato salad, or whatever else. Yeah.
All right. Well, that puts a pin in the Gen Con stuff. Thank you for that. Let's hit some quick questions before we head for the door here. What are you reading these days?
I know this will shock a lot of people. I'm reading a lot of Robert E. Howard. I've got to do a ton of research. We're doing this miniseries that comes out this fall called Battle of the Blackstone, and it's sort of this amazing cross-time adventure pulp story that involves a whole bunch of Robert E. Howard characters. And Howard wrote over 200 short stories and hundreds of poems and all sorts of fragments of material that never got finished. And I am just sort of like mainlining this stuff, to create these synergies and to build this really cool kind of pulp, this epic pulp adventure. And I've got help. I've got this guy, my editors, obviously at Chris Patera in particular, but also Jay Zetterberg and this guy, Jeff Shanks, who is a Robert E. Howard scholar. He's a pulp scholar and collector. Yeah. And he's amazing. He writes all the essays in the back of the new Conan issues, and we jump on calls and we laugh and chat and brainstorm all kinds of stuff. But as much as possible, I'm trying to get the original material, and when you read for research, it's very different from reading for fun, because I've got a little pad of paper beside me. So as I'm reading it on my tablet or in the physical books, I'm just taking quick little point form notes, things I want to circle back on, or sometimes terminology or funky locations or character names or stuff like that. And then I'll bring that list back to my computer and I'll do tons of research and dig deeper or ask Jeff questions or things like that. And it's fun, it's work, but it's fun. So that's been the majority of my reading right now, has been original pulp kind of stuff and some related material in the whatever, eldritch horror kind of mythos stuff and things like that, to get into that sort of headspace and bring as much of that as I can to the fore. So that's been the majority of my, I wish I could say fun reading, but it is fun, but it's like, it's work. Yeah.
What are you playing these days?
I am playing Shadow of the Erd Tree, the Elden Ring expansion. So Elden Ring, obviously, the Souls games as a whole, they've got a real grip on me. And this new expansion came out. I know some people just whipped through it, but I'm too busy right now. So I've been savoring it inadvertently because I'm getting pulled in little chunks through it. As I free up a little bit of time, I can carve out. And it's kicking my ass like every Souls game does. And it creates its own kind of fun little fantasy narrative. So on the video game front, that's what I've been playing. I've been running first edition AD&D this year as sort of a 50th anniversary throwback. I made a new AD&D adventure that I ran at GaryCon, and I'm going to be running at Gamehole. And I might do a pickup session at Gen Con in the evening if people are down to clown. And that would be FOMO. Oh man, it was super fun. It's very much a trappy ridiculous. The narrative container of how the adventure works is built so that you can do all the stupid stuff with, like, it justifies itself. It's the term like Death Trap Dungeon style kind of thing, where it's been built to screw with people. And so everyone goes into it with this, we're going to do an old school dungeon delve. It's going to be full of riddles and weird monsters, and every room is its own encounter. And how far can we get before it dusts us or we, win? And I've been playtesting it multiple times now with people, and that's been a lot of fun. And so that got me into this weird headspace of like, oh, what did I love about AD&D? And so I'm currently running against Cult of the Lizard God, which is a classic old school AD&D adventure for my wife and a small group of friends. And it's been weird sort of melding the AD&D isms with modern kind of role-playing conventions, where you're just sort of like, oh, we can just have a scene where we're just chatting with the townspeople or stuff like that. And then the combat is just vicious and nasty and strange because it's old school D&D. And so, and me remembering how much was Dungeon Master fiat, because you don't have a set of skills, for example. That's even proficiencies and stuff are more second edition, And so players, are just saying, well, can I do this? And I'm like, yeah, all right. Or no, for these reasons, or you have to make this kind of a role, or you have to do this sort of thing. And you can see why, D&D is so incredibly compelling with the right players and the right dungeon master, even in this nascent form, because, well, you can do anything, you know what I mean? But on the other hand, if you're strict and structured, and it can be maddening because you're like, well, why? Well, why not? Where's the rule for this? And, those original books are not, even with their indexes, they're not. No. And so every so often you're just shooting from the hip and you're like, we'll do it like this, in a way that as a kid, I think I was more desperate for that structure, because it was the role-playing game was a medium for the communication, taking us from make-believe on the playground of I shot you, you're dead, no, I'm not, into, oh, we're doing this shared thing together. So if the rule wasn't in the book, it was like, well, you're a dick. Why are you letting me do the thing I want to do? And now we're adults, and it's just like, yeah, man, cool. Try this, try that. Hey, could you not do that? You're kind of bringing the game down for everyone else. And everybody's, oh, I didn't mean to. Okay, let's not do that. Great. And on you go. So I've been playing AD&D. So that's kind of fun. Yeah, kind of neat.
It's funny how AD&D first edition, there were, like you say, there was no real skills and stuff, but then if you played a thief or a rogue or whatever it was back then, there were those percentiles for all your skills.
What's interesting about that, so the way I've been running them, and this is just, again, off the cuff, right? Those percentages are so low at the early levels, right? Yeah. And so the way I've been doing it is I've been saying those are under duress. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you're doing open locks and you got all the time in the world, I want you to open that chest. You know what I mean? I want you to do the thing. So what I'm saying is like, oh, you're trying to do this fast. You're trying to do this, while there's a guards patrolling down the hallway and they're coming your way. That's the roll. That's the 22% chance or what may have you. You're trying to do hear noise, and the hear noise percentage is some stupid, like I think 20% or whatever.
Yeah, it was slower.
Yeah. Like if you just want to listen down a hallway, I'll tell you can hear echoes, or you hear a creature roaring in the distance, or the banging of footsteps or something. It's not like no one else can hear noises. That's like I'm in a crowded tavern and I'm trying to pluck out that conversation from everything else. I'm trying to focus in on those guys in the corner and what are they doing? Do you know what I mean? Then make Mario 20%, Oh, you're trying to sneak past the Gorgon. Okay, now you got to make your move silently or whatever, But if it's just like climb a wall, like just climb the wall. Like, let's just go. Yeah.
Jim Zub, the writer and artist, is now working at being a game designer. You're playing with mechanics and pulling apart. I love this. This is your triple threat, man.
Yeah, cool. Trying to be. Well, it just made sense, because we were looking at it and it seemed ludicrous when we were looking at it. We were sort of like, okay, can I do this thing? Well, according to this, 20% of the time you can do this core skill that you're really good at. Apparently as a rogue. Pickpockets, again, if you want to push it against someone dangerous, now that's the time to use that percentage. But if you're going to go to like, I don't know, some little nothings, from somebody, from some random peasant. I'm not going to be like, oh, here we go. The dice are going to slay you, Yeah.
Right on, buddy. Okay, last quick fire. And I made this one just for you, my friend.
Oh.
If you had access to the Iron Chef kitchen, what would you make?
So people might not know this. Over the pandemic, I became obsessed with cooking. I wanted to cook well before that, but that gave me the impetus to just I wanted to eat all the things I've been missing at restaurants. And we kept getting takeout and it sucked. And so I was like, I'm going to learn to cook a bunch of stuff. I don't know, man. It sounds weird. I want to learn. I make duck. I make duck breast and stuff, but cooking maybe a whole duck or doing duck au orange or something really ass fancy would be pretty cool. Mm-hmm. When I was in Japan in May, my wife and I, we were in Osaka, we went to a duck ramen place and the broth was to die for. It was some of the best ramen I've ever had, some of the best soup I've ever had. And it was so rich. You could not eat this more than once a month or you're going to die. But wow, it was incredible. So maybe making something kind of super fancy like that, that'd be pretty cool. I mean, if you're going to go for it, do the Iron Chef thing. Let's try and do that.
Nice.
I don't know that that's a good idea to put yourself on that precipice, but if you got all the equipment, and
why not?
Maybe you just go for it. Yeah.
Very cool. All right, buddy. That is it. I'm going to start pushing you out the door. But before we go, I'd like to open up a little space. You've touched on a lot of the stuff you worked on, but is there anything coming up or recent that you really want to promote, Signal Boost?
So the Young Adventurers Guides for D&D continue, and they're doing extremely well this fall. So earlier in the year, we released Artificers and Alchemy, which is all about making magic items and the Artificer class, which is really cool. This fall, they're doing a box set, a second box set of 5 to 8, for gifts, like a gift set that you can buy for your, someone who's just getting into the hobby. Or a lot of dungeon masters have told me it's a really good way to get their friends who feel kind of intimidated by charts and all the math stuff and just sort of go, look, this is the narrative. This is how it works. Read this. It's a real easy entry point to understanding how D&D works and the kind of ingredients of those fantasy worlds. So that's really cool. And then the ongoing adventures of Conan the Barbarian. So the world's biggest sword and sorcery hero, the Superman of sword and sorcery. It's kind of crazy to have my hand on the wheel right now with that. And we got big, cool plans. And we just finished our first year on the relaunch series and it's doing phenomenally well. Lots of cool stuff coming in the hopper. So we've got this, like I said, pulp crossover called The Battle of the Blackstone. That's going to be coming out September is the first issue. And Conan number 13 comes out end of July. And every month, it is like a metronome. We're bringing that book out. I'm working with, because most of the artists I'm working with are not able to do a monthly, the quality of art that comes out now in modern comics is ridiculous. And so between Savage Sword of Conan, the black and white anthology magazine, The Battle of the Blackstone, and the monthly book, I'm working with 5 different art teams on different stuff, just Conan related. So that's nuts in the best way possible. And so, yeah, my head is deep in the Hyborian age, and I couldn't be happier.
Nice. All right, buddy, I'm going to push you out the door, but as you're heading out, do you have any final words? I want a parting word of wisdom. I want to give you the last word.
If you are, making stuff and you're finishing it and you're learning from it, then you're on the right path. That's all there is to it. There's no... it sounds weird given that I work in fantasy and all that sort of stuff. I'm not a believer in destiny per se, but I do believe in, if you keep at something, you will have cool experiences and you will meet cool people. And then don't get obsessed with the end goal has to be this one specific thing. If you want to be an astronaut, you may not get to walk on the moon, but you're probably going to be involved in space science and it's going to be really great. You know what I mean? I'm not doing any of the job stuff I thought I was going to when I was in school, but I have such a fun and fulfilling career because I kept at it and I kept meeting people and I kept doing things. And so that's the kind of way that I've treated my creative career is find like-minded people, keep at it, make the most of those experiences and celebrate your victories where you can.
Well, folks, that damn drunken wizard has once again animated the ale barrels, and they're grumpy this time, so it's time to head out the door. But first, Jim, thank you for sitting down and once again sharing your wisdom and insights. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your spot at the table. Until we meet again, remember to keep creating, sharing, and exploring those worlds. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.